If you enjoy this kind of reflective storytelling, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So, picture this. You're sitting at what you think is just another casual family dinner, the kind where you're expecting small talk, maybe some laughs, and definitely nothing out of the ordinary. But then, out of nowhere, someone says something that completely shifts the energy in the room. A comment so unexpected that it forces you to see everything and everyone in a completely different light. That's exactly what happened to me, and honestly, I'm still processing it. Before we dive into the full story, if you enjoy real-life experiences and thought-provoking moments like this, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It genuinely helps the channel grow. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What would you do if a single sentence at dinner turned your world upside down? Alright, let's get into what happened. It all started about 2 weeks ago when I got a text from my Aunt Carol, someone I hadn't heard from in probably 6 months, maybe longer. The message was short and sweet. Hey, we're having a small family dinner this Saturday at Mom's house. Would love for you to come. It's been too long. At first, I didn't think much of it. Family dinners at my grandmother's place used to be a regular thing when I was younger, but as everyone got busier with their own lives, jobs, relationships, and responsibilities, these gatherings became less and less frequent. Still, there was something about the invitation that felt a little different this time, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was just the fact that Carol was the one reaching out instead of my mom or grandmother, who usually organized these things. Either way, I figured it would be nice to reconnect with everyone, catch up on what's been going on, and enjoy a home-cooked meal. I mean, who says no to that, right? So I replied with a simple, sure, I'll be there. What time? And thought nothing more of it. The days leading up to the dinner were pretty uneventful. I went about my normal routine, work, errands, the usual grind, and honestly, the dinner wasn't even really on my mind until the day before. That's when my mom called and casually mentioned that she'd also be attending, along with my Uncle Jim, his wife, and a few cousins I hadn't seen in years. She seemed upbeat about it, almost unusually so, which I found a bit odd but didn't overthink. It'll be good to have everyone together again, she said. I agreed. There was a part of me that was genuinely looking forward to it. After all, despite the occasional drama that comes with any family, I do care about these people, and I missed the sense of connection we used to have. Saturday arrived, and I spent the afternoon getting ready, picking out something casual but presentable, and mentally preparing myself for the usual small talk. Questions about work, my personal life, future plans, all the standard stuff. I even stopped by a bakery on the way and grabbed a dessert to bring along, figuring it was the polite thing to do. When I pulled up to my grandmother's house, I noticed a few cars already parked outside. The front porch light was on, and I could see warm light glowing through the windows. It looked cozy, inviting even. I grabbed the dessert box, took a deep breath, and walked up to the door. My grandmother greeted me with a big hug, the kind that only grandmothers give, and ushered me inside. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the air, and I could hear voices and laughter coming from the dining room. Everything felt so normal, so familiar. I said hello to everyone, exchanged hugs and pleasantries, and settled into a chair near the middle of the long dining table. My Aunt Carol was buzzing around the kitchen, my Uncle Jim was telling some story about his latest fishing trip, and my cousins were scrolling through their phones, half listening. It was all very typical, very predictable. At that moment, I truly believed this was just going to be another nice, uneventful family dinner. Nothing more, nothing less. Little did I know, everything was about to change with just one comment. Dinner started off the way you'd expect, plates being passed around, compliments about the food, people asking each other the usual catch-up questions. How's work going? Are you still living in the same place? Did you hear about so and so? On the surface, everything seemed fine, maybe even pleasant. But as I sat there, fork in hand, I started to notice these little things that felt just slightly off, like when you sense a storm coming even though the sky is still blue. My Aunt Carol, who's normally chatty and animated, kept glancing at my grandmother with this look I couldn't quite read, something between nervousness and expectation. My Uncle Jim, usually the loudest person in the room, was quieter than usual, responding to questions with short, clipped answers and avoiding eye contact with certain people at the table. Even my mom, who had seemed so enthusiastic about this dinner on the phone, was pushing food around her plate more than actually eating it. There were these moments of silence that felt heavier than they should have, the kind where everyone's chewing but nobody's really talking, and you can hear the scrape of silverware against plates a little too clearly. Someone would try to fill the quiet with a comment about the weather or a half-hearted joke, and people would smile, but the smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. It was like everyone was performing the role of a happy family member, but the script wasn't sitting right with anyone. I caught my cousin Sarah looking at me once, and when our eyes met, she quickly looked away, almost like she knew something I didn't. That's when I started to feel this low-level anxiety creeping in, this sense that maybe I was missing something important, some unspoken context that everyone else seemed to be aware of. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that maybe I'd been away from these gatherings for so long that I'd forgotten how they naturally ebbed and flowed. But the feeling wouldn't go away. My grandmother, who usually loves to tell stories about the old days and ask everyone about their lives, was unusually quiet, only speaking when directly addressed, and even then, her responses were brief and measured. She kept folding and refolding her napkin in her lap, a nervous habit I'd seen her do before when something was bothering her. At one point, my Uncle Jim cleared his throat like he was about to say something significant, and the whole table seemed to tense up for a second, but then he just asked someone to pass the salt, and the moment dissolved. It was bizarre. I started wondering if maybe there had been some kind of argument before I arrived, or if there was family news, good or bad, that people were trying to figure out how to bring up. I considered asking if everything was okay, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of making things more awkward, or maybe it was just that I didn't want to be the one to crack open whatever was simmering beneath the surface. So I did what everyone else seemed to be doing. I played along, made small talk, complimented the food, and pretended not to notice the strange undercurrent running through the room. But I was noticing. I was noticing everything, the way my aunt kept checking her watch, the way my mom kept stealing glances at my grandmother, the way the conversation kept almost veering towards something deeper but then abruptly changing direction at the last second. It felt like we were all walking on eggshells, tiptoeing around something massive that was sitting right in the middle of the table, invisible but undeniable. And the worst part was, I had no idea what that something was. I just knew that this dinner, which I'd thought would be simple and unremarkable, was turning into something else entirely. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words, and I could feel the weight of them pressing down on everyone. I kept waiting for someone to break the tension, to just say whatever needed to be said, but nobody did. We just kept eating, kept smiling those strained smiles, kept pretending that everything was perfectly, utterly normal. But it wasn't. And deep down, I think we all knew it. The table was full, almost too full. There were serving dishes crowded in the center, a golden roasted chicken glistening with herbs, a bowl of creamy mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed with garlic, a basket of warm rolls, and a casserole dish with some kind of cheesy pasta bake that my grandmother always made for special occasions. It was the kind of spread that should have felt comforting, the kind that usually made you want to loosen your belt and settle in for seconds. But as I sat there, plate piled high, I couldn't shake this restless feeling that had taken root in my chest. I picked at the chicken, chewed slowly, and tried to focus on the conversations happening around me. My cousin Sarah was talking about her new job, something in marketing, and my aunt was nodding along, asking questions that seemed supportive but slightly distracted. My uncle chimed in with a comment about how different the job market was now compared to when he was starting out, and someone made a joke about technology, and there was polite laughter that faded quickly. The whole thing felt rehearsed, like we were all reading from a script we'd memorized but didn't really believe in. I found myself watching people more than listening to them. The way my mom kept reaching for her water glass even though it was still mostly full. The way my grandmother's hands trembled just slightly as she cut her food. The way my uncle kept checking his phone under the table, as if he was expecting a message or maybe just looking for an escape. I started wondering if I was overthinking everything, if maybe I was projecting my own discomfort onto a situation that was actually fine. Maybe this was just how family dinners were now, a little awkward, a little stilted, the natural result of people who'd grown apart trying to come back together. But then I'd catch another glance, another pause, another moment that felt loaded with meaning, and I'd know I wasn't imagining it. Something was definitely going on. I tried to participate in the small talk, offering my own updates when prompted. Yes, work was going well. No, I wasn't seeing anyone seriously at the moment. Yes, I was still living in the same apartment. My answers felt robotic, and I could tell people weren't really listening to them anyway. They were just waiting for their turn to speak, or more accurately, waiting for something else, something that hadn't happened yet but felt inevitable. I took a bite of the mashed potatoes, and they were perfect, buttery and smooth, exactly how I remembered them. But I could barely taste them. My mind was too busy running through possibilities, trying to figure out what this dinner was really about. Was someone sick? Was there financial trouble? Had someone done something that needed to be addressed in front of the whole family? I ran through scenario after scenario, but none of them felt quite right. I glanced around the table again, taking in each face. My grandmother at the head, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. My mom to her right, wearing a smile that didn't match the worry in her eyes. My Aunt Carol, still bustling even though she was seated, offering more food, refilling drinks, keeping busy. My Uncle Jim, staring at his plate like it might have answers. My cousins, young and somewhat oblivious, but even they seemed to sense that something was different tonight. And then there was me, sitting in the middle of it all, feeling like an outsider at my own family's table. The conversation drifted to safer topics, memories from when we were kids, funny stories about relatives who'd passed, plans for the upcoming holidays. But even those felt strained, like we were all trying too hard to recreate something that used to come naturally. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh, nodded when I was supposed to nod, but inside I was screaming with curiosity and confusion. What was this dinner really about? Why did everyone seem so on edge? And why did I feel like I was the only one who didn't know what was coming? The food kept circulating, plates were refilled, and time moved forward, but that restless feeling in my chest only grew stronger, coiling tighter with every passing minute. We were about halfway through the meal when it happened, the moment that shifted everything. My grandmother had just finished her plate and was sitting back in her chair with this contemplative look on her face, the kind she gets when she's about to say something meaningful. The table had fallen into one of those brief silences, the kind where everyone's just focusing on their food for a moment, and that's when she spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, cutting through the quiet like a knife through butter. I've been thinking a lot lately about family, about what we leave behind, and who really shows up when it matters. At first, it seemed like just another one of her reflections, the kind of thing grandmothers say when they're feeling philosophical. A few people nodded, murmured agreement, probably expecting her to launch into a story about the old days or some lesson she'd learned over the years. But then she continued, and her next words landed differently. It's interesting, isn't it, how some people are always around when things are good, when there's something to gain, but the moment you actually need them, they're nowhere to be found. The air in the room changed instantly. It was like someone had sucked all the oxygen out and replaced it with something thick and uncomfortable. I felt my body tense without even meaning to. I watched as faces around the table shifted. Some people looked down at their plates, others exchanged quick glances, and my Aunt Carol's face went pale. My mom closed her eyes for just a second, like she was bracing herself for impact. My Uncle Jim set his fork down carefully, deliberately, and I could see his jaw tighten. Nobody said anything for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. My grandmother wasn't looking at anyone in particular, or maybe she was looking at everyone all at once. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but there was something underneath it. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment, or perhaps just a tired kind of honesty that comes when you've stopped caring about keeping up appearances. I didn't understand exactly what she meant or who she was talking about, but I could feel the weight of her words settling over the table like a heavy blanket. And then, before anyone could respond or try to smooth things over, my Aunt Carol spoke up, and her voice was shaking slightly. "Mom, is this really the time or place for this?" My grandmother didn't flinch. "If not now, when? We're all here together. Isn't that what family dinners are for? Being honest with each other." The tension ratcheted up another notch. I could see my mom reaching for her water glass again, gripping it like a lifeline. My uncle shifted in his seat, and I thought he might say something, but he didn't. My cousins had stopped eating entirely and were looking around like they were trying to figure out if they should stay or make an excuse to leave. And I just sat there, frozen, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, trying to process what was happening. That one comment, that seemingly simple observation about who shows up, had peeled back the veneer we'd all been maintaining and exposed something raw underneath. I still wasn't entirely sure what the issue was, but I knew we'd crossed a line, moved from the territory of polite small talk into something real and potentially explosive. The dinner I'd thought would be uneventful had just become the most uncomfortable meal I'd experienced in years, and we weren't even done eating yet. Quick pause here. If you're finding this story as intense as I did living through it, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'd genuinely love to know in the comments. Have you ever been at a family gathering where one comment just changed everything? How did you handle it? Alright, let's continue because this is where things get even more complicated. The silence that followed my grandmother's words wasn't just quiet. It was loud, deafening even, in the way that only truly uncomfortable silence can be. It pressed down on all of us, filling every corner of the room until it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We all just sat there, frozen in our respective positions, as if we'd been caught in a photograph that captured the exact moment everything fell apart. I could hear the tick of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound I'd never noticed before but now seemed impossibly loud. Someone's phone buzzed on the table, and the vibration against the wood sounded like thunder, but whoever it belonged to didn't even glance at it. My eyes moved from person to person, trying to read the story being told through faces and body language alone. My Aunt Carol had her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had gone white, and she was staring at her plate like she was trying to will herself to disappear. There were tears forming in the corners of her eyes, not falling yet, just gathering there, catching the light. My Uncle Jim had leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest in a defensive posture that screamed discomfort and maybe anger, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at my grandmother, at himself, or at the situation in general. His face had gone from its usual ruddy color to something darker, redder, and a muscle in his jaw kept twitching. My mom was sitting perfectly still, but I could see her chest rising and falling rapidly, like she was trying to control her breathing, trying to stay calm when everything inside her wanted to react. She kept looking between my grandmother and my aunt, her expression caught somewhere between sympathy and frustration, like she was torn between defending someone and staying neutral. My cousin Sarah had set down her fork and was fidgeting with her napkin, folding and unfolding it in her lap, her eyes darting around the table but never landing on anyone for more than a second. Her younger brother looked completely lost, like a kid who'd wandered into an adult conversation he wasn't prepared for, which, to be fair, might have been exactly what was happening for all of us. And my grandmother, she sat there with this strange calm about her, almost peaceful, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down, regardless of the mess it made. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, her back straight, her expression unreadable. If she regretted what she'd said, she wasn't showing it. If she was satisfied at having finally spoken her truth, that wasn't showing either. She was just present, waiting, letting the silence do whatever work it needed to do. I realized I'd been holding my breath and forced myself to exhale slowly, quietly, not wanting to be the one to break the spell or draw attention to myself. Part of me wanted to say something, anything, just to cut through the tension, but I had no idea what that something would be. I didn't understand the full context, didn't know the history behind my grandmother's words, didn't know who she was really talking about or what had happened to prompt such a pointed comment. All I knew was that everyone else seemed to understand perfectly, and their silence was confirmation of whatever truth she'd just laid bare. The silence stretched on, second after agonizing second, and I started to notice other things, the way my aunt's shoulders were shaking slightly, like she was trying not to cry. The way my uncle kept swallowing hard, like there were words stuck in his throat that he couldn't quite force out. The way my mom finally looked directly at me, just for a moment, with an expression that seemed to say, "I'm sorry you have to witness this," which only made me more confused and more anxious. I felt like I was watching a play where I'd missed the first act and couldn't follow the plot, but the emotional impact was hitting me anyway, seeping into my bones and making my stomach twist with anxiety. The food on my plate, which had seemed so appealing before, now looked completely unappetizing. The warm, cozy atmosphere of the house, which had welcomed me when I arrived, now felt suffocating and claustrophobic. I wanted to be anywhere but here, wanted to rewind time to before that comment was made, wanted to go back to when this was just a slightly awkward but ultimately harmless family dinner. But there was no going back. That silence had spoken volumes, had revealed fractures and wounds that had probably been there all along, just hidden beneath polite conversation and forced smiles. And now that they'd been exposed, there was no pretending they didn't exist. It was my Aunt Carol who finally broke the silence, and when she did, her voice came out shaky and strained, like each word was being pulled from somewhere deep and painful inside her. "Mom, I know you're upset, and I understand why, but this isn't fair. You're making it sound like I abandoned you, like I didn't care, and that's not what happened." Her words hung in the air for a moment before my grandmother responded, her tone still calm but with an edge I'd rarely heard from her. "I'm not saying you didn't care, Carol. I'm saying you weren't there. There's a difference." My aunt's face crumpled slightly at that, and one of the tears that had been gathering in her eyes finally spilled over, trailing down her cheek. "I had my own life, my own responsibilities. I couldn't just drop everything. You know that." My Uncle Jim suddenly spoke up, his voice gruff and defensive. "We all had our own lives, Mom. That doesn't mean we don't care about you." My grandmother turned to look at him, and there was something in her expression, not anger, exactly, but a kind of weary disappointment that seemed to cut deeper than any harsh words could have. "I'm not talking about caring, Jim. I'm talking about showing up. About being present when things were hard, not just when they were convenient." I could see my uncle bristle at that, his defensive posture becoming even more pronounced. "That's not fair. I called. I checked in. What more did you want from me?" And then my mom, who'd been silent up until this point, finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "She wanted us here, Jim. Physically here. Not just phone calls or texts. Actually here." The words seemed to hit him, and something in his expression shifted, anger giving way to something that looked almost like guilt, though he clearly didn't want to acknowledge it. My aunt was crying more openly now, not sobbing but with tears streaming down her face, and she kept wiping them away with her napkin, which was already damp and crumpled. "I did the best I could," she said, and there was both defiance and desperation in her voice. "I know it wasn't perfect, but I was trying to balance everything. My job, my kids, my marriage. I couldn't be everywhere at once." My grandmother's expression softened slightly at that, just a fraction. "I know you were trying, sweetheart. I do. But trying and being there aren't always the same thing, and I think we need to be honest about that." The emotional dam that had been holding everything back was clearly starting to crack. I could see it in everyone's faces, years of unspoken feelings, misunderstandings that had never been addressed, disappointments that had been swallowed and buried rather than discussed. My cousin Sarah spoke up tentatively, her voice small. "What happened? I feel like I'm missing something." My mom took a deep breath before answering. "When your grandmother had her surgery last year, and then during her recovery, she needed help. A lot of help. And not all of us were as present as we should have been. The pieces started falling into place for me then." I remembered hearing about my grandmother's surgery, something with her hip, I think, but I'd been told it was minor, that everything was fine, that she was recovering well. Clearly, there had been more to the story than I'd been told. My Aunt Carol's voice rose slightly, defensive again. "I came when I could. I took time off work. I brought meals. I don't know what else you expected from me." My grandmother shook her head slowly. "I expected you to be honest about what you could and couldn't do, instead of making promises you couldn't keep. I expected you to understand that I was scared and in pain and needed my family, not just occasional visits when it was convenient." The hurt in her voice was palpable now, no longer hidden beneath that calm exterior. My uncle cleared his throat. "Mom, we all dealt with it in our own ways. Maybe they weren't the ways you wanted, but we were doing our best." My mom interjected, and there was a slight edge to her tone now. "Were we, though? Were we really doing our best, or were we doing what was easiest for us?" That seemed to strike a nerve because my uncle's face flushed even darker. "Don't act like you were perfect, either. You weren't there every single day." My mom nodded slowly. "You're right. I wasn't. And I regret that. I wish I had done more, been there more consistently. But at least I can admit it." The conversation was unraveling now, emotions rising to the surface like bubbles in boiling water, each person revealing their own guilt, their own hurt, their own version of events. And through it all, my grandmother sat there, still relatively calm but clearly carrying the weight of disappointment and loneliness that had built up over months. I realized this wasn't really about one surgery or one period of time. It was about a pattern, about feeling forgotten or deprioritized by the people who were supposed to matter most. And now, sitting at this dinner table, all those feelings were finally being spoken aloud, messy and painful and impossible to ignore. My cousin Sarah, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional weight that had settled over the table, made the first attempt to redirect the conversation. She cleared her throat softly and said, with forced brightness, So, has anyone seen that new show everyone's talking about? The one with the time travel thing. Her voice sounded too loud in the tense atmosphere, too cheerful, and it landed awkwardly, like a joke told at a funeral. A few people glanced her way, but nobody responded with any real enthusiasm. My uncle's wife, who'd been silent this entire time, picked up on Sarah's effort and jumped in to help. "Oh yes, I've heard about that one. Is it any good?" She smiled encouragingly at Sarah, and for a moment it seemed like maybe they could steer this dinner back to safer waters. But my grandmother wasn't having it. She didn't say anything confrontational, didn't shut them down harshly, but she also didn't engage. She just sat there, hands still folded, looking at Sarah with an expression that was kind but unmoved, as if to say, "We're not done here yet." The silence that followed Sarah's attempted topic change was somehow even more uncomfortable than the one before it, because now there was the added layer of a failed rescue mission hanging in the air. Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment, and she quickly looked down at her plate, clearly wishing she hadn't said anything at all. My Aunt Carol, perhaps sensing that direct topic changes weren't going to work, tried a different approach. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and started gathering empty dishes. "Let me clear some of these plates. We can bring out dessert soon. I made your favorite pie, Mom, apple with that crumb topping you love." She was moving quickly, almost frantically, stacking plates and glasses with shaking hands, creating activity and noise to fill the emotional void. My grandmother watched her for a moment, then said quietly, "Carol, sit down. The dishes can wait." There was something about the way she said it, gentle but firm, that made my aunt freeze mid-reach for a serving bowl. She stood there for a second, caught between the instinct to keep moving and the realization that her mother was asking her to stay present, to not run from this discomfort. Slowly, reluctantly, she set the plates back down and returned to her seat, and I could see her hands trembling as she placed them in her lap. My cousin's brother, the younger one who'd been mostly silent, tried next, his voice cracking slightly with nervousness. "Grandma, do you still have that photo album from when we went to the beach that one summer? Remember how much fun that was?" It was a sweet attempt, an appeal to happy memories, a reminder of better times. My grandmother's expression did soften at that, and she nodded. "I do remember, honey. That was a wonderful trip." For just a moment, it seemed like maybe this would work, maybe this memory could be a bridge back to pleasantness. But then she added, "It's those kinds of moments I treasure. Times when everyone actually wanted to be together, when being family felt effortless and natural, not like an obligation." And just like that, we were back in the difficult territory again. The attempt to lighten the mood had backfired, becoming instead another reminder of what had been lost or changed over time. My Uncle Jim tried a more direct approach, his voice carrying a hint of frustration now. "Mom, we get it. You're upset. You've made your point. Can we please just enjoy the rest of the meal and talk about this another time, maybe when it's not in front of everyone?" My grandmother looked at him steadily. "This is exactly when it needs to be talked about, Jim. When else do we all sit together like this? When else would this conversation happen? If not now, then never, and I'm too old to keep swallowing things that need to be said." My mom attempted a different tactic, her voice gentle and diplomatic. "Mom, I think what Jim means is that maybe we're all a bit overwhelmed right now. These are big feelings, important conversations. Maybe we need time to process everything before we can really hear each other." It was a reasonable suggestion, the kind of thing a mediator might say, but my grandmother shook her head. "I've had plenty of time to process, sweetheart. Months of it. Months of sitting alone, thinking about who called and who didn't, who visited and who found excuses. I don't need more time. I need honesty." Every attempt to change the subject or lighten the mood was failing, not because people weren't trying hard enough, but because my grandmother had clearly decided that this dinner was going to be the moment when everything came to light. She'd set her course, and she wasn't going to be diverted by small talk about television shows or dessert or happy memories from the past. The emotional current running through this dinner was too strong now, and we were all being pulled along by it whether we wanted to be or not. I sat there feeling helpless, watching person after person try to rescue us from this discomfort, only to have their efforts gently but firmly rejected. The meal that should have brought us together was instead exposing all the ways we drifted apart, and there was no easy way to fix it, no magic words that could smooth everything over and return us to normal. After all the failed attempts to redirect the conversation, something shifted in the room. It was subtle, but I felt it, a kind of collective resignation, an understanding that we weren't going to be able to avoid this conversation anymore, so we might as well face it head-on. My mom was the first to really lean into that shift. She set down her fork deliberately, took a deep breath, and looked directly at my grandmother with an expression that mixed love, regret, and determination. "Mom, you're right. We need to talk about this honestly. I think we've all been avoiding it because it's uncomfortable and because acknowledging where we fell short feels terrible. But you deserve better than our avoidance." Her words seemed to give permission for everyone else to stop pretending, to stop trying to escape. My Aunt Carol wiped her eyes one more time and then spoke, her voice steadier now, though still thick with emotion. "I want to understand, Mom. I really do. Tell us, what you needed that you didn't get. Not so we can make excuses, but so we can actually hear you." My grandmother looked at each of us in turn, and I could see her considering how to put into words what she'd been feeling for so long. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but carried the weight of months of loneliness and disappointment. "When I had the surgery, the doctors told me recovery would take time. They said I'd need help with basic things, cooking, cleaning, getting around. And you all said you'd be there." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "The first week, you were. Carol, you came by every other day. Jim, you called regularly and stopped by on weekends. It felt like family. But then, slowly, the visits became less frequent. The calls got shorter. Everyone got busy with their own lives again, and I understood that, I really did. But understanding doesn't make it less lonely." My aunt's face crumpled again, but this time she didn't try to defend herself. She just listened. My grandmother continued, "There were days when I couldn't reach the dishes in my upper cabinets. Days when I was in too much pain to walk to the mailbox. Days when I just wanted someone to sit with me for an hour so I didn't feel so isolated. And I didn't want to be a burden, so I didn't call and complain. I told myself you were all busy, that I was being needy, that I should be grateful for what help I did get." Her voice wavered slightly but remained controlled. "But the truth is, I felt forgotten. Not unloved. I never doubted that you loved me, but forgotten. Like I was a task on a to-do list that kept getting pushed to tomorrow." The honesty of her words hit hard. I could see it in everyone's faces, the recognition, the guilt, the sudden understanding of how their individual small decisions had added up to something much bigger and more painful for her. My Uncle Jim's defensive posture had completely dissolved, and he looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what he was hearing. "Mom, I didn't realize. I thought you were doing okay. You always said you were fine when I called." My grandmother gave him a sad smile. "Of course I said I was fine, Jim. What else was I supposed to say? No, I'm not fine. I'm lonely and scared and feeling like my family has moved on without me. That's not an easy thing to admit, especially to your children who you've spent your whole life trying not to burden." My mom reached across the table and took my grandmother's hand. "You could have told us. You should have told us. We would have tried to do better." My grandmother squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe. Or maybe you would have felt guilty for a day or two and then life would have swept you back up again. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because that's how life works. People have jobs and children and responsibilities. I understand that intellectually. But emotionally, I needed my family, and you weren't there in the way I needed you to be." My Aunt Carol spoke up, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing enough. I thought the meals I brought and the occasional visits were helpful. I didn't realize how much more you needed." My grandmother looked at her with compassion. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel terrible, Carol. I'm telling you because I'm tired of pretending everything is okay when it isn't. I'm tired of having these surface-level conversations where we all act like we're a close family when the truth is we've become people who see each other a few times a year and barely know what's really going on in each other's lives." That truth landed heavily on all of us. My uncle cleared his throat. "So what do we do? How do we fix this?" My grandmother shook her head slightly. "I don't know if it can be fixed, exactly. The past is the past. But maybe going forward, we can be more honest with each other. Maybe we can admit when we're struggling instead of pretending we're fine. Maybe we can actually show up for each other instead of just saying we will. My mom nodded slowly. You're right. We need to do better. I need to do better. And I know saying that isn't enough. We have to actually follow through. The conversation had shifted from defensive explanations to genuine reflection. People weren't making excuses anymore. They were actually listening, actually absorbing what my grandmother was saying. It was painful and uncomfortable, but it also felt real in a way that most family conversations don't. These were truths that had been buried for too long, and now that they were out in the open, there was at least the possibility of dealing with them honestly. I sat there taking it all in, feeling grateful that I hadn't been part of whatever had happened during my grandmother's recovery, but also feeling guilty for my own absences and my own assumptions that everything was fine just because nobody had told me otherwise. This conversation was a mirror being held up to all of us, showing us the ways we'd failed to truly see and support each other, and it was impossible to look away from that reflection. The dinner didn't end with any dramatic resolution or profound moment of healing. There was no group hug, no tearful reconciliation where everyone promised to do better and everything was magically fixed. Instead, it ended the way most difficult conversations end in real life, quietly, awkwardly, with everyone emotionally exhausted and not quite sure what to do next. After my grandmother had said her piece and we'd all sat with the weight of her words for a while, someone, I think it was my mom, suggested we have the dessert my aunt had mentioned earlier. It felt like a formality more than anything else, a way to create some structure to move us toward the end of the evening. My aunt got up and brought out the apple pie, along with plates and forks, and we passed slices around the table in near silence. The pie was probably delicious, but I couldn't really taste it. I was too busy replaying the entire evening in my mind, trying to process everything that had been said. People made half-hearted comments about the food, "This is really good, Carol," and "the crust turned out perfect," but the conversation didn't go anywhere beyond that. We were all still processing, still sitting with our own feelings of guilt or hurt or confusion. My cousins finished their dessert quickly and asked to be excused, which my grandmother granted with a tired nod. They disappeared into another room, probably relieved to escape the heavy atmosphere. My Uncle Jim ate his pie methodically, not looking at anyone, clearly lost in his own thoughts. My aunt kept apologizing under her breath, not to anyone in particular, just quietly saying, "I'm sorry," over and over until my mom reached over and squeezed her hand to make her stop. After dessert, people started the familiar ritual of wrapping up a family gathering, clearing plates, packing up leftovers, gathering coats and bags. But it all felt different this time. The usual warmth and connection that comes at the end of a good meal together was absent. Instead, there was this lingering discomfort, this awareness that something fundamental had shifted and we couldn't pretend it hadn't. My grandmother walked each of us to the door as we left, giving hugs that lasted a little longer than usual. When it was my turn to leave, she held me tight and whispered, "I'm glad you were here tonight. Sometimes people need to hear difficult things, even if it's uncomfortable." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just hugged her back and told her I loved her. As I walked to my car, I could see other family members standing by their vehicles, not quite leaving yet, probably trying to compose themselves before driving home. The night air was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the emotional intensity of the past few hours. I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting the engine, just staring at my grandmother's house, watching the lights in the windows, thinking about everything that had happened. The drive home was strange. My mind kept circling back to different moments from the evening, the look on my aunt's face when my grandmother first spoke those pointed words, the way my uncle's defensiveness had slowly crumbled, the tears my grandmother had tried so hard not to show. I thought about all the dinners I'd missed over the years, all the times I'd been too busy or too tired or just not motivated enough to make the trip to see her. I'd always assumed someone else was taking care of things, that she was fine, that my presence wasn't really needed. But tonight had shown me how wrong those assumptions were. When I got home, I couldn't settle. I tried watching something on TV, but couldn't focus. I tried going to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying the evening, examining it from different angles, understanding new things each time I thought it through. I realized that what had happened tonight wasn't really about one surgery or one period of recovery. It was about years of gradual distance, years of family members drifting into their own separate lives and losing touch with the people who were supposed to matter most. Over the next few days, the impact of that dinner continued to unfold. I found myself thinking about it constantly, at random moments throughout the day. I'd be at work or running errands, and suddenly I'd remember something someone had said, or the expression on someone's face, and I'd have to stop and process it all over again. I talked to my mom on the phone a couple of days later, and she sounded different, more thoughtful, more contemplative. "That dinner really shook me," she admitted. "I've been thinking about all the times I should have been there and wasn't. All the times I told myself I'd visit next week, or that a phone call was good enough, or that she understood I was busy. I took her for granted, and I hate that about myself." I told her I understood, that I'd been having similar thoughts. We talked for a long time about family, about responsibilities, about the gap between our intentions and our actions. It was one of the most honest conversations I'd ever had with my mom. I heard through the family grapevine that my Aunt Carol had called my grandmother the day after the dinner and they'd talked for hours. Really talked, not just the surface-level checking in that usually happened. My uncle had apparently gone to visit my grandmother a few days later, something he hadn't done spontaneously in months. Whether these changes would last, whether that one difficult dinner would actually result in lasting improvements in how we showed up for each other, that remained to be seen. But something had definitely shifted. The comfortable illusions we'd all been maintaining about being a close, connected family had been stripped away, and we couldn't unknow what we now knew about ourselves and each other. That dinner had ended hours ago, but its impact was still rippling through all of us, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths and decide who we wanted to be going forward. Looking back now, weeks after that dinner, I've come to understand something important about family, about relationships, and about the power of honest words spoken at the right, or maybe wrong, moment. That single comment from my grandmother, that seemingly simple observation about who shows up when it matters, didn't just change one evening. It changed how I see my entire family and my role within it. The lesson that remained with me wasn't a simple one with a neat moral attached to it. It was complicated and layered, the way real-life lessons usually are. I learned that silence and politeness, while comfortable, can sometimes be more damaging than difficult honesty. My grandmother had spent months being polite, not wanting to burden anyone, swallowing her hurt and loneliness because she didn't want to be seen as demanding or ungrateful. And in doing so, she'd allowed a gap to form between what she needed and what her family understood she needed. None of us had intentionally abandoned her or stopped caring. We'd just gotten comfortable with a surface-level version of family connection that required less effort, less vulnerability, less presence. We'd substituted phone calls for visits, texts for real conversations, good intentions for actual follow-through. And because my grandmother hadn't complained, we'd assumed everything was fine. We'd mistaken her silence for contentment when it was actually self-protection. But that night, she decided to stop protecting us from the truth of her experience. She decided that maintaining family harmony wasn't worth sacrificing her own need to be seen and heard. And in doing so, she forced all of us to look at ourselves more honestly than we'd been willing to before. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't pleasant. But it was necessary. I've thought a lot about the courage it must have taken for her to speak those words, knowing they would shatter the comfortable facade we'd all been maintaining. She's an elderly woman who's been taught her whole life to be accommodating, to put others' comfort before her own needs, to be the person who holds the family together by never making waves. And yet she chose to make waves, to risk our discomfort and disapproval, because she'd reached a point where being honest mattered more than being liked. There's something powerful in that, in deciding that your truth deserves to be spoken even when it's inconvenient for others to hear it. The lesson extended beyond just that one situation with my grandmother's surgery and recovery. It made me think about all the relationships in my life where I'd been going through the motions without really showing up. How many friendships had I let drift because I was too busy? How many times had I said, "We should get together soon," without actually making concrete plans? How often had I assumed people were fine because they said they were, without looking deeper or asking follow-up questions? That dinner taught me that words matter immensely, not just the ones that are spoken, but also the ones that are left unsaid. My grandmother's comment changed everything because it broke through layers of unspoken assumptions and forced us to actually communicate about things we'd been avoiding. But the words that came after, the honest conversation about needs and disappointments and the gap between intentions and actions, those mattered just as much. Real connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires words that go deeper than "I'm fine" and "everything's good." It requires admitting when you're struggling, when you're lonely, when you need help. And it requires the people who love you to actually listen to those admissions and respond with action, not just sympathy. I also learned that you can love someone and still let them down. My Aunt Carol loved my grandmother. That was never in question. My Uncle Jim loved her too. So did my mom, so did I, so did everyone around that table. But love alone isn't enough if it doesn't translate into presence, into showing up, into being there in the ways that person actually needs. We'd all been loving my grandmother from a comfortable distance, in ways that fit neatly into our schedules and didn't require too much disruption to our daily lives. And she'd felt that distance acutely, even as she understood intellectually that we were all busy and had our own lives. In the weeks since that dinner, things have been different. Not perfect, change doesn't happen overnight, and old patterns are hard to break, but different. My mom has been visiting my grandmother twice a week without fail, and she started calling me to join her sometimes. My aunt has apparently created a shared family calendar where people can sign up for specific days to check in on my grandmother, ensuring someone's always paying attention. My uncle has been more present, more engaged when he does visit, asking real questions and listening to the answers instead of just going through the motions. And me? I've been making more of an effort too. Not just with my grandmother, but with my family in general and with other relationships in my life. I've started asking people how they're really doing, not just as a greeting but as a genuine question. I've been more willing to be honest about my own struggles instead of defaulting to, "I'm fine." I've been showing up more consistently, understanding now that presence is a practice, not just a feeling. That dinner was uncomfortable. It was painful. It exposed things about ourselves that we didn't necessarily want to see. But it was also a gift, in a strange way, a gift of truth that pushed us toward being better, toward building the kind of family connection that's real and sustaining, not just performative. One comment changed everything because it needed to. Because we'd been drifting for too long, assuming too much, paying too little attention. And my grandmother, in her wisdom and her courage, refused to let us keep drifting without at least trying to call us back. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's this: don't wait for a crisis or a confrontation to show the people you love that they matter. Don't assume that because someone says they're fine, they actually are. Don't let politeness and comfort prevent you from having the conversations that need to be had. And if you're the person who's been swallowing your hurt, who's been pretending everything's okay when it isn't, speak up. Your truth deserves to be heard, even if it makes people uncomfortable. The relationships worth having are the ones that can survive honesty, that can be strengthened by vulnerability rather than destroyed by it. That family dinner taught me all of this in the span of a few hours. And while I wouldn't want to repeat that particular evening, I'm grateful for it. Grateful for my grandmother's courage. Grateful for the wake-up call. Grateful for the reminder that showing up matters more than I'd realized. Words have power, to wound, yes, but also to heal, to clarify, to change the course of relationships for the better. One comment changed everything for us. The question now is what we do with that change, how we honor it, and whether we can sustain the growth it sparked. Only time will tell, but at least now we're trying. And sometimes, trying with honesty is the best any of us can do. Thanks so much for watching this story all the way through. It means a lot that you took the time to listen. If this resonated with you in any way, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Every like and comment genuinely helps this channel grow and lets me know these stories are connecting with people. I'm curious to hear your perspective. Have you ever experienced a moment where one comment or conversation completely shifted the dynamic in your family or friend group? How did you handle it? Did it bring people closer together or push them further apart? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and I love hearing your stories and experiences. Sometimes the most powerful thing about sharing these personal moments is realizing we're not alone in navigating the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of family relationships. If you know someone who might relate to this story or who could benefit from hearing it, please consider sharing this video with them. And if you're going through something similar right now with your own family, I hope this gave you some perspective or at least reminded you that these difficult conversations, as uncomfortable as they are, can sometimes be the catalyst for real change and deeper connection. Remember, showing up matters, not just physically, but emotionally, consistently, and honestly. Don't wait for a crisis to tell the people you love that they matter to you. Life's too short and too unpredictable to assume there will always be more time later. Thanks again for being here, for listening, and for being part of this community. I'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.